Have you ever wondered what it would be like to never age, to watch yourself grow more beautiful with each passing day while the world around you withers and decays? I didn't believe in curses, not until I found the necklace. It was an antique piece, a delicate silver chain with a pendant in the shape of an hourglass. The shopkeeper told me it was a family heirloom, passed down for generations. He warned me that it was one of a kind, that no one should ever wear it for too long. But I didn't listen. I was young, desperate, and vain. I thought it would be a symbol of my success, of how far I'd come. I wasn't the prettiest, but I worked hard to be perfect. When I put the necklace on, I felt a strange surge of energy, as though I'd unlocked something deep within myself. My skin felt smoother, my hair shinier. I looked at my reflection and didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She was stunning, glowing with a beauty I'd only ever seen in magazines. But what really struck me was the lack of wear in my eyes. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, like I was finally untouchable. The next morning, I woke up and looked in the mirror. I looked younger, as though the years had melted away overnight. My skin was flawless, no trace of the fine lines I'd been obsessing over. I ran my fingers through my hair, marveling at how it cascaded in perfect waves. It was like I'd found the fountain of youth. I felt incredible, unstoppable. But there was something in the back of my mind, a small voice warning me. It said, "Don't you want to know what happens if you keep wearing it?" I shrugged it off. A week passed, and I kept wearing the necklace. My beauty only grew. People began noticing, complimenting me more than they ever had. My career skyrocketed as my appearance became the talk of the office. Men couldn't keep their eyes off me, and women envied me. It felt so good to be admired, to feel like I was finally what I'd always dreamed of. But as the days went on, I began to feel different. It wasn't physical, not at first, but I started to feel hollow. It was like my emotions, my soul, were being drained little by little. The reflection I saw in the mirror grew more vibrant, while I felt emptier. At night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of what I had become. Then one night, I felt something strange, something crawling under my skin. I checked the mirror and recoiled in horror. There, on my neck, under the pendant, my skin looked darker, as if it was rotting from the inside. I tried to scratch it, but the skin didn't heal. It just spread, like a bruise that wouldn't fade. The necklace was feeding on me. As I looked at my reflection, I saw the changes happening in real time. My face looked more youthful than ever, perfectly sculpted, glowing. But the air around me grew thick with a stench, as if something was decomposing beneath the surface. My reflection grinned at me, cruelly, as if it was mocking my pain. The next few weeks were a blur. I stopped eating, I stopped sleeping. All I cared about was how I looked. My reflection, flawless and ethereal, pulled me in. But when I looked away, I could feel the rot inside me spreading faster, the void growing. My insides were decaying while my outward appearance remained pristine. I started to hear whispers, low, guttural sounds that seemed to come from within the necklace itself. "More," they said, "more of you, give more." I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. The more I wore the necklace, the more I faded away. My friends and family stopped visiting. They said something was wrong with me, that I looked unnatural, but I was too far gone to care. My beauty was all that mattered, and with each passing day my insides rotted further, while my face remained untouched, ageless. I knew what was happening. I could feel the weight of the curse closing in around me, but I didn't care, not anymore. Then one night I looked in the mirror and saw something that froze me in place. The reflection wasn't mine anymore. The woman I had once been was gone, replaced by a hollow version of herself, smiling grotesquely, her eyes lifeless. And in the background, I saw something that wasn't there before, the dark, shifting shadows of something watching. I tried to pull away, but the necklace pulled tighter, squeezing the life out of me. I fell to the floor, gasping, my last thought a desperate plea for someone to help. But no one ever came. The next morning, I was gone. The necklace was found, lying on the floor, the chain broken, but the pendant, still intact, glowed faintly in the dark. The shopkeeper's warning rang in my ears, though I no longer had ears to hear it. The necklace, now cursed beyond recognition, would find a new owner soon, and the cycle would repeat, as it always did. Have you ever held something in your hands and felt a shiver run down your spine? like the object itself was alive, watching you, waiting for you to make the wrong move. I didn't believe in curses, not until I found the dagger, not until it destroyed everything. Let me make this clear. I didn't find the dagger, it found me, and it ruined my life. This wasn't some thrift store, haunted vibes kind of thing. No, this was the real deal. And I'll tell you up front, if you ever come across something that makes your skin crawl just by looking at it, for the love of whatever you believe in, leave it alone. But I didn't. I couldn't. And now, well, let's just say, I'm not sure how much longer I have left. It all started on a road trip. My friend Charlie had a knack for dragging me into his bad ideas, and this one topped the list, driving out to the middle of nowhere to explore an old abandoned plantation house. He called it urban exploration, but let's be honest, it was trespassing. Still, the adrenaline made it worth it. The house was a sprawling beast, decayed and sagging under the weight of time. Ivy choked the walls and the air smelled of mildew and rot. Creepy as hell, Charlie said, grinning. I told him we shouldn't go inside, but he laughed it off as always. The dagger was in the basement. We found it in a wooden box, tucked beneath a pile of rags that might have been clothes once. The blade was black, not just painted, but black like it swallowed light. The handle was wrapped in something leathery, and the pommel had a single red stone embedded in it, like a glaring eye. I didn't want to touch it. Looks cursed, I joked, trying to mask the unease crawling up my neck. But Charlie? He didn't hesitate. The moment he picked it up, the temperature dropped. I'm not talking a little chill, I mean my breath came out in clouds. Charlie laughed nervously, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Guess it's colder down here than we thought, he muttered, his voice shaky. We should have left it there. Back home, Charlie kept the dagger. He said it was just a cool find, but I could see the way it got to him. He started carrying it everywhere, even to the bar. It's like a good luck charm, he said, though nothing about it felt lucky. And then the accident started. First, it was minor things, a glass shattering in his hand for no reason, or his car's engine refusing to start even though it had been fine the day before. But soon, it got worse. One night, he called me, his voice a mess of sobs. I think I killed someone, he whispered. I raced to his apartment, but when I got there, the place was empty. The dagger sat on the kitchen counter, gleaming under the dim light. And the walls, oh God, the walls were covered in handprints, smudged, bloody handprints, too small to be Charlie's, too small to be an adult's. That's when I started hearing the whispers. I should have left. I should have called the cops or burned the place down. But I couldn't. Something about the dagger pulled me in, like it wanted me to take it. The whispers grew louder the closer I got, hissing secrets I didn't understand but couldn't ignore. I don't remember picking it up, but suddenly it was in my hands, heavy and ice cold. My reflection in the blade wasn't my own, it smiled when I didn't. And then the door slammed behind me. From that moment on, my life wasn't mine anymore. The dagger stayed with me, whether I wanted it or not. I'd leave it in one room and it would show up in another. I'd throw it away and it would be back on my nightstand by morning. The dreams were the worst. I'd wake up in a sweat, the sound of chains dragging still echoing in my ears. In one dream I was in a field surrounded by shadowy figures chanting, their voices blending into a low, guttural hum. They held the dagger out to me, forcing it into my hands. And then there were the deaths. Charlie was the first. He drowned in his bathtub, though the autopsy said there wasn't any water in his lungs. The cops called it a freak accident. I called it a warning. People around me started dropping like flies. Neighbors, co-workers, even a random guy I passed on the street. Every time I'd see the dagger in my mind's eye, its red stone glowing brighter, feeding on the chaos. I tried to get rid of it. I threw it in the river, buried it in the woods, even drove 3 states over and left it in a junkyard. But it always came back. Always. One night I woke up to the sound of footsteps in my room. I froze, my heart pounding as the dagger's red stone glowed in the corner, illuminating a figure hunched over in the shadows. It turned to look at me, and its face was mine. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I destroy it? Believe me, I tried. Hammers, fire, acid, nothing worked. The blade remained flawless, unmarked. And every time I failed, the whispers got louder, angrier. Now I'm out of options. I've been writing this down as a warning, but the truth is I don't think it matters. The dagger won't stop. It's cursed, yes, but it's more than that. It's hungry. I can hear it calling to me right now, whispering my name like a lover's breath. Maybe if I give it what it wants, it'll let me go. So if you ever find something that feels wrong, trust your gut. Walk away, don't touch it. Because some objects aren't just cursed, they're waiting, and they've already chosen you. Epilogue. 2 days after finishing this story, the dagger disappeared. I left it on my desk that night, and when I woke up, it was gone. At first, I felt relief, but then the phone rang. It was Charlie's sister. "I found something of his," she said, her voice trembling. "A black dagger with a red stone. It was under his bed. I think it's alive." The line went dead, but not before I heard the whispering. It wasn't coming from her end. It was behind me. Do you believe words can trap a soul? Not just haunt, not just curse, but truly hold someone in the grip of despair, reliving the same moment forever? I didn't believe it either until I opened her diary, until her story became mine. I bought the diary at an estate auction. I know how that sounds, like some cliché setup for a ghost story, but I'm telling you, it was real. I didn't go looking for trouble. I didn't even know who Elisa Montrose was. The diary just stood out. Black leather, gold trim, and the initials EM etched into the corner. It looked untouched by time, even though it was dated 1874. The auctioneer said it had been locked in a cedar chest in the attic of the Montrose estate, unopened for over a century. No one wanted it. Family tragedy, he said. The Montroses were cursed from the start. That should have been my cue to walk away, but something about the diary drew me in. Maybe it was the mystery, or maybe it was the way the air felt heavier when I picked it up, like the world was holding its breath. I took it home, intending to flip through a few pages before bed. That was my first mistake. The first entry was dated January 3rd, 1874. Today, I saw him again, the man with the silver pocket watch. He stood at the edge of the woods, watching the house. Mother says not to speak of him, but he knows. He always knows. It was written in neat, looping handwriting, but the words felt wrong. They didn't feel like memories. They felt like confessions. The more I read, the more obsessed I became. Elisa wasn't just writing about her life, she was documenting something sinister. A man, always described the same way, tall, gaunt, dressed in black with a silver pocket watch that ticked louder than it should. At first he just watched from the woods, then he started coming closer. By the third entry, Elisa's tone had changed. January 14th, 1874, he was at the window tonight. I know it was him. Mother says I'm imagining things, but how can she not hear the ticking? It's in the walls, in the floorboards. I can't sleep, I can't breathe. He's getting closer. I felt the hairs on my arms rise as I read. Something about the way she described the man made him feel real, like he could step out of the page and into my room. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. The words felt alive, pulling me deeper. By the time I reached the entry for February 2nd, I realized the diary wasn't just a record, it was a trap. February 2nd, 1874. He's here. I hear the ticking everywhere now. Mother locked me in the attic to keep me safe. But I know the truth. She made a deal with him. She traded me. I see his shadow under the door. The clock strikes midnight and he steps inside. If someone reads this, please don't let him in. My breath hitched. That was the last entry, but the diary wasn't empty. Beneath the last page, I found something pressed between the sheets. A single strand of hair, golden and brittle with age. And then the ticking started. At first it was faint, like a clock in another room. I looked around, convinced it was my imagination. I didn't own a clock, but the sound grew louder, steady and relentless. Tick, tick, tick. I slammed the diary shut, but the sound didn't stop. That night, I dreamed of Elisa. She stood in a field of withered grass, her face pale and gaunt. Her eyes were empty, black pits that seemed to swallow the world. "He's coming," she whispered, her voice hollow. "He always comes." The next morning, I tried to return the diary to the auction house, but the doors were locked, the windows boarded up. It was like the place had never existed. I tried burning it, but the flames refused to touch it. I buried it in the woods, but it reappeared on my nightstand the next morning, the ticking louder than ever. I started losing time. Hours would vanish, and I'd find myself standing in strange places, holding the diary, the pages open to that last entry. Don't let him in, but it was too late. He was already here. I saw him for the first time a week later. The man with the silver pocket watch. He stood at the edge of my yard, just like Elisa described, his face obscured by shadows. The ticking grew deafening, drowning out my thoughts. And then he smiled. "I don't know how much time I have left. The diary is changing, new entries appearing every night in my handwriting. It's no longer Elisa's story, it's mine." Last night, the final entry read, February 12th, 2024. He's here. I hear the ticking everywhere now. If someone reads this, please don't let him in. 2 weeks after the diary was last seen, it reappeared at another estate auction. The auctioneer described it as immaculate, untouched by time. It sold to a young woman who said she felt drawn to it. When asked her name, she smiled faintly and said, "Elisa." Do you believe a painting can trap the soul of the artist? Not just curse it, but hold the very essence of their being within its canvas, leaving them to wander the borders of their own creation forever. That's what happened when I bought The Hollow Man. It wasn't just a painting, it was a doorway. I found it at a flea market, tucked behind a pile of faded landscapes and forgotten portraits. Its frame was ornate, blackened with age, and the painting itself, well, it was haunting. A man stood in the center of an endless gray field, his face a featureless void. There were no eyes, no mouth, no nose, just smooth, empty flesh. But it wasn't just the image that drew me in, it was the sensation. Looking at it felt like stepping too close to the edge of a cliff. You couldn't help but lean in, even though you knew it was dangerous. The vendor said it came from the estate of a reclusive artist, Thomas Greaves, who disappeared in 1962. They say he went mad painting it, the vendor muttered. Claimed it was alive, said it watched him work. That should have been my cue to walk away. But I didn't. I bought it for $30 and hung it in my living room. It was a conversation starter at first. Friends would come over, stare at the faceless man and shudder. "Why would you hang something so creepy?" they'd ask. I didn't have an answer. I just knew I couldn't stop looking at it. That was my first mistake. The changes started small. The room where the painting hung always felt cold, no matter how high I turned up the heat. Shadows seemed longer in that corner, darker somehow. Then there was the whispering. At first I thought it was the wind or the hum of an old pipe. But late at night, when the house was silent, I could hear it clearly, a soft, almost pleading murmur coming from the painting. "Let me out," it would say. I told myself it was my imagination, but deep down I knew better. Things escalated quickly after that. One night, as I stared at the painting, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A faint outline of features where the face should have been. It wasn't much, just the hint of eyes and a mouth, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. It was like the painting was holding me there, forcing me to watch as the faceless man began to change. Over the next few days, the transformation continued. The features became clearer, more defined. He had piercing eyes now, dark and hollow, and a mouth twisted into a grimace. Worse, his head seemed to be turning, ever so slightly, as if following me around the room. I stopped sleeping. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of the gray field. I was standing in it, the sky a suffocating shade of ash, and he was there, the man from the painting. "You took my place," he would say, his voice a low growl. "Now you're mine." I woke up screaming more than once, only to find the painting staring back at me, the man's eyes alight with a cruel, knowing gleam. I tried to get rid of it. God, I tried. I threw it in the basement, but the next morning it was back on the wall, perfectly hung as if it had never been moved. I tried burning it, but the flames wouldn't touch it. I even took it to a junkyard and left it there, only to find it waiting for me at home, the man's grin wider than before. I started seeing him everywhere, in mirrors, in windows, in the shadows that danced on my walls. He wasn't just in the painting anymore. He was in my house, in my life, and he wasn't alone. He wasn't. One night, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hall. My heart pounded as I crept toward the noise, every step feeling like a lifetime. When I reached the living room, I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, their faces as blank as the man's had been when I first bought the painting. They surrounded it, their hands reaching toward the canvas as if trying to pull themselves free. And in the center of it all stood the man, his face now fully formed, his eyes meeting mine with a malevolent joy. "It's your turn," he said, and the world went black. When I woke up, the painting was gone. The house was empty, eerily quiet. At first I thought it was over, that I was free. But then I looked in the mirror and screamed. My face was gone. Smooth, featureless flesh stared back at me, and in the distance I heard the whispering start again. 2 weeks later, a young woman bought the Hollow Man at a thrift store for $20. She said she loved how haunting it was, how it seemed to tell a story. The clerk asked if she knew the name of the artist. "Thomas Greaves," she replied, not knowing the trap she had just stepped into. Do you think your reflection ever stares back at you with a life of its own? Not just mimicking your movements, but truly watching, waiting, learning who you are and what you hide? That's the question I never thought to ask before I inherited my great-uncle's antique mirror. The thing was massive, its frame carved from dark mahogany, etched with serpentine figures that seemed to twist and writhe when you looked too long. It was his pride and joy, or so I was told at the reading of his will. Great-Uncle Victor was an eccentric man, the type of person whose house you dreaded visiting as a child. It wasn't just the musty smell or the dimly lit hallways. It was the feeling that his home held secrets you weren't meant to uncover. When I was a kid, I'd always felt like something was watching me in his study, but I never connected it to the mirror. I brought it home mostly out of guilt. It seemed wrong to throw away something he clearly cherished, even if it gave me the creeps. I hung it in the hallway just outside my bedroom and tried not to think about it. That was my first mistake. The first night I noticed the mirror seemed unusually clear, sharper than any reflection I'd ever seen. It wasn't just reflecting the hallway, it was exaggerating it, making it look longer, darker, more ominous. My reflection looked normal though, so I shrugged it off. But as the days passed, I started noticing small differences. At first it was subtle, a smirk on my reflection's face when I wasn't smiling, a slight tilt of the head I hadn't made. Then it got worse. One night, as I walked past the mirror, I saw my reflection standing still even though I was moving. I froze, heart hammering in my chest, and watched as it raised a hand, slowly and deliberately, to point at me. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I tried to convince myself I was just overtired, but the mirror wouldn't let me forget. Every time I passed it, my reflection seemed off. The eyes were too sharp, the smile too wide, the movements a fraction of a second too late. And then the dreams started. In them, I was standing in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. Only it wasn't me. It was a version of me, darker, crueler. "Let me in," it whispered. "I can make you perfect." I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my ears ringing with the sound of my own voice saying those words. It was around this time I noticed changes in myself. People at work started complimenting me more, saying I seemed more confident, more charismatic. My skin looked clearer, my posture straighter, but I didn't feel better. I felt hollow, like something was siphoning off my essence piece by piece. I started avoiding the mirror, covering it with a sheet, but that didn't stop the dreams. If anything, they got worse. In one, I saw myself standing in the hallway, staring at the sheet-covered mirror, only it wasn't me. It was the other me, the one from the mirror. "You can't hide forever," it said, pulling the sheet away. "You don't deserve this life." But I do. I woke up gasping for air, the sound of glass shattering echoing in my ears. When I ran to the hallway, the sheet was gone, the mirror uncovered, and there was no sign of a break. Just my reflection staring back at me, smiling. I tried to destroy it. God, I tried everything. I snapped it, but the glass didn't even crack. I threw it into the basement, but it reappeared in the hallway the next morning, spotless as ever. I even tried selling it, but the buyer returned it within hours, pale and shaking, muttering about visions and voices. That's when I realized the mirror wasn't just cursed, it was alive, and it was feeding off me. My reflection grew more vibrant as I became more withdrawn. My skin turned sallow, my eyes sunken. I started losing time, waking up in places I didn't remember going to. Once I woke up in front of the mirror, my hand pressed to the glass, my reflection grinning. "Almost there," it whispered. Last night, it finally happened. I was dreaming, or at least I thought I was. I stood in front of the mirror, my reflection clearer than ever. "Let me in," it said. But this time, it didn't wait for my answer. It reached out, its hand pushing through the glass, cold fingers wrapping around my wrist. I tried to pull away, but it was too strong. The glass rippled like water as it pulled me inside. Now I'm here, trapped in the endless dark, staring out at my own body as it walks around in the world I once knew. I scream, but no one hears me. The last thing I saw before I was pulled under was my own face, smirking at me from the other side of the glass. If you ever come across an antique mirror with serpents carved into its frame, leave it alone, because once you let it into your life, it will never let you go.